One of the problems that we hear coming up a lot with B2B product
Mm.
managers is that they tend to be sort of quite hands off from customers, and that customers generally will talk to salespeople, and that the product managers are a little bit far removed. What would be your advice on trying to understand what it is the customers kind of want and need? Like, can you just rely on the salespeople, or do you actually need to get in front of the customers themselves?
You have to get in front of the customers
Mm.
themselves. I think salespeople have a very specific job, right? They have something which is, from their point of view, relatively static, right? They're not thinking about how to evolve a product. They'll be listening to what their customers want, but the vast majority of salespeople are very focused on, I'm going to close a deal, I'm going to try and close as fast as I can. And if that deal isn't going to close, I'm going to quickly move on to the next one. And so they're not going to be approaching that conversation with the same mindset as a product person who's going to be listening for needs, wants, friction points, points of interest. And every time you put a product person into a sales pitch meeting or sitting at a desk next to a B2B customer, they will spot something that a salesperson has not spotted because they're just looking, they've got a different agenda in that conversation. I think it's such good fuel for creativity and for accuracy in terms of what you're building, is just constantly being out in market. One of the other things which I know loads of people do, but so effective for us at Carlisle, again, was building an advisory panel. So we would get a bunch of car dealers, most of whom were competitors with each other, most of whom weren't very keen to talk to each other, into a room to discuss something really difficult and complex that we were nervous about doing. So when we launched our auction model, which none of the dealers told us they wanted, they didn't want to be competing with each other on price. They wanted to be able to take things out of market rather than kind of fight over them in an auction. We got this room full of people and we talked through all of the difficult pain points. And actually, instead of us defending our position, they land up having that kind of conversation with each other. And it was incredibly useful to see these different perspectives emerging. And not only did we get ideas about how to shape the product to work better for some of the challenges, just crazy things like they were like, don't have the auction end at the same time as your competitors, because that's a nightmare for us. We want them to end at different times. We're like, oh, that's a really good point. But also we can see we got great language. We got, in their own words, how they would defend that position or how they would market that position to themselves, because they were doing it to each other in the room. And the power of those types of conversations is enormous. And so I'd really recommend that. I'd really recommend those types of mechanics. I think also, I think the other thing that we're seeing emerge is with growth teams as well, and where there's customization of a product, or particularly in some of the AI tooling where there's training to be done of training models, the product managers or the engineers are very, very customer facing, because they're embedded in those organizations in order to set those products up or to train those models. And they're actually not only often kind of going in to do the initial installation, they have to go and find the next project as well. And so there's a crossover set starting to emerge between product managers and salespeople. And actually, do product managers also need to start to acquire sales and consultancy skills, in terms of being able to take some of these products to market. And so maybe we do come all the way back to an organization where roles become much more fluid, and there's a lot more mixing of the skill sets that you need as a product manager.
And I've heard of people using LLMs to pretend to be customers and things like that as well. Have you tried that at all, or kind of come across people doing that?
Lily, I've been having so much fun with this over the last few weeks. I mean, I think, the very simple way of doing this is with custom GPTs, where you can create personas and you can interview those personas, and you can use collections of those personas in all sorts of different ways. I've been talking to CEOs who've created their board in a set of custom GPT personas and use that as a way to kind of interrogate themselves before their board meetings, or who are creating their customer personas and then interviewing those customer personas about ideas that they're exploring. I took a very interesting look at a tool this week called Your Focus Group, .ai, which has been developed by a small business called Rocket Makers. And that is an AI tool that enables you to create a focus group. So you type in what you want your focus group to be about. It creates the personas. You can make some adjustments to those personas, and then you can interview that focus group on a topic. And I was, you know that the stuff is good, right? But blown away by the quality of the thinking that you're getting back from that. And I'm not yet in the camp of this will entirely replace focus groups, because I think there's definitely some element of spontaneity and creativity, etc., that you get. But I do think one of the things that's particularly interesting for B2B research is that you can create a focus group for people that you would never be able to get in a room. So you can create, very senior stakeholders. And I'm sure we're kind of, weeks away from being able to train the personas in that group on LinkedIn profiles or articles that people have written, and being able to interrogate those people on what they would say about an idea or how they would respond to something that you're doing. And I think that's incredibly fascinating, because the power of the insights that you can get back and the kind of leap that you can take on the start of your kind of product discovery journey is phenomenal, and quite exciting, actually.
I think that the first thing I do is like put a load of product people that I know in the room, and then
Well,
probably
exactly.
just
I mean,
listen to them
it's
complaining about being a product manager.
like console, Yeah.
So, what are some of the other ways that PMs can learn from or work better with the commercial sales teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably talked through quite a lot of them in terms of sort of being able to use them as a route to customers, being able to use them to test ideas with, a car, anything that we wanted to do, both from a kind of proposition point of view or from a product point of view, started with our commercial teams. Like, what do you think? Does this work? How would you sell this? How would you talk about this? What's this set of dealers going to say? What's this set of dealers going to say, etc. But I think then once you've built something, and you're taking that to market, and I talked about this kind of like quarterly, you can't expect a sales team to take 10 things to market in a quarter. You've got to be able to bundle those in some way so that they can work through a set of customers. And they've got a very clear and concise message to be able to take to market in a period of time. But the thing to also make sure is that the commercial teams are incentivized around that. So you might have kind of core incentivizations for commercial teams around their revenue streams or their kind of cost base or whatever the case it may be, but using that commercial incentive to drive particular product features. So when you launched a wallet feature at Carwow, which enabled us to take the transaction or take the fees for the car that was changing hands, our commercial teams had at least 6 months of incentivization around wallet, just adoption. People just had to get people through the KYC process and on and get their first transactions through. And that is absolutely what drove the growth and adoption of that quite a high friction product, because you were going through a big KYC process as a business at the start. And so you needed someone who was very commercially driven and very incentivized to help their partners through that. And I think that's a really important part about getting the most you can from your commercial teams for growing a product.
And we've talked a lot about commercials. It would be wrong of us to not talk about pricing. And this is often sort of a bit of a hot potato, or maybe is it a hot potato? You kind of don't want to hold the hot potato, but I feel like people actually want to hold this. So maybe this is a very cold potato, but like who should own pricing in the organization?
Oh, $1 million question, right? I mean, I think we're also here. There's another place where we're at a very interesting intersection, because I think if you look at the way pricing historically was done, as you would get, particularly for B2B businesses, you'd get a very specialist consultancy like Simon Kucher in, and they would help you to think through what your market looked like and what your competitor set looked like and what your business model looked like and where you should be pricing. But I actually think we're edging towards no one being responsible for those decisions, because if you look at the level of capability that we're seeing in AI in terms of being able to understand market pricing and the level of data that it can get access to and synthesize, we're probably not that far of having to go to big data sets to be able to figure out what your competitor pricing is. And we're also at a point where we're not very far off being able to do live and dynamic pricing. So will we see kind of published rate cards structurally change shape, and actually will you start to move to like much more kind of usage-based pricing, and that usage-based pricing being determined by all sorts of different factors. But I think we're probably not far off moving to a world in which it's not a person's job to decide pricing. I think that's quite exciting, actually, because I think it opens up all sorts of different possibilities.
Mm. Okay, and we often talk about kind of sales-led organizations, marketing-led, technology-led, and then product led. Although I feel like product led, because product is that, Venn diagram of sales, customer, and technology, or commercial and technology. Oh no, hang on, I've said that wrong, but everyone knows what I mean. So I feel like product led is kind of like everything working balanced and even together, but sales led is kind of, more of an emphasis on doing what sales need and being a sales organization. Marketing led being very kind of like led by what marketing need and brand and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously technology is being led by the tech. Is product led just always the way to go because it's the balanced approach, or is there a world in which those other formats work?